Hey everybody. Here we're looking at the stimuli of the week, number 1.1 for week 4 for the agriculture unit. So we're going to take a look at breaking down the stimulus, getting ideas as to how to think about the stimulus and what kinds of questions we might be asked about this particular set of maps. So the first thing to note here is that we're looking at two stimuli, right? Two maps in this case. And it looks like we have different scales on these maps in general. So we have this first map on the top, 1970 to 2015, and we can see all the different continents and countries here. So we're looking at what we might call a global or an international scale. The second map, the one in this lower corner here, we don't have the entire world identified. We just have this one specific region, and we're looking really at this one particular part of the earth. So this general area, this continent would be Asia. And so if we do our division, right, our compass, we can see South Asia here, East Asia here, and so we're looking at Southeast Asia. And that would be a regional scale, and we're looking at Southeast Asia in particular, right? Aside from this, I want to look at all the other factors for my map, looking at the legend, the title, to ensure that I have an understanding of what this map is talking about. So I have here changes in average price yield per acre from 1970 to 2015. That 1970 is important, right? This is going to be an event that occurred. And the specific event we're thinking of here is that green revolution, right? That third agricultural revolution. And we have it to the modern day till today, right? And it looks like we're looking at changes in the rice yield, right? So yield, amount of product could be another way that we phrase that. And we're looking at specifically rice yield, rice amounts changing over time, right? Here we have our legend, change in rice yield per acre, and we have the key here for our choropleth map, because we're using different shades, right? So we're looking at a choropleth map here. Now globally, we can see these different shades, and we can see on this international scale, right? Some conclusions can be drawn here. So we're looking at things like South America, or Latin America in general, has the greatest global increases. So that entire region itself, right, all of the space, Central and South America, all this together would be Latin America, Mexico, Central America, and South America would be Latin America together. And it looks like those have the greatest yields out of any other region of the world, right? And that's looking at 1 ton to 1.61 tons of change per acre in this time period, right? These 45 years, 1970 to 2015. As far as the lowest numbers, right, the least amount of change, we have a lot of different regions here globally for these changes in agricultural production, but we don't have any one specific region that's going to be the least amount, or we don't have one that's in this no change. Everyone at least improved a little bit in rice yields. Now you want to remember too that the Green Revolution was the fusion of technology from NDCs to LDCs, and specifically we're looking at what we call high yield seeds. So these varieties of seeds that are able to produce more crops than usual, than before. Pesticides and fertilizers, and of course GMOs, right? We have all of these different developments out of the Green Revolution that get diffused to LDCs, and we see one of these effects being the change in yields per acre. And here specifically we're looking at rice, but we could look at other things like corn or wheat or general agricultural production. We see that increase as the Green Revolution takes off and as the Green Revolution enters its mature years, right, into the 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s. Now, this is all my international scale stuff, right? This is background information, stuff that I know, stuff that I can reference, and this is the specific thing to the map itself, right? I want to know the most and the least, and here the most change, the greatest amount of increases in rice yield per acre happened in Latin America. It's important, right? It's going to be a lot of effects. Now, on the regional scale, I can't think about things in terms of the entire world. I'm really just looking at Southeast Asia in this case. And from what I can tell, I have some different shades here in Southeast Asia too, right? I can see that Laos and Vietnam have some of the greatest change, along with Indonesia, right? So I can say here the greatest change occurred in Laos, Vietnam, and Indonesia. So I saw the greatest amount of change in this specific region of the world. Now, this global scale, this international scale, it's not going to give me that level of detail, right? If I look into this region of the world on my first map, on this international scale map, I don't have any of that detail. All of it is just averaged out as the second to highest change in rice yield per acre. Here on the regional scale, I get more details, I get more specific information, and I can segment out the changes by country in this region, right, by state in this region of the world. That's going to be one of these differences, these limitations on scales. When we think about an international scale, this is what would be a small scale, which covers large areas, but doesn't provide us with many details. And for the regional scale, looking at Southeast Asia, this is going to cover small areas. It's what we call a large scale, which covers small areas, but more or many details are provided by this particular scale. That scale is inverse. So if we think about a small scale, we're thinking about big spaces. Think about a large scale, we're thinking about small spaces. And it's going to be one of the difference in scales, or the conclusions that we draw. Because here we might say that, oh, well, South America in general, on an international scale, had the greatest amount of change in rice yields per acre, but on the regional scale, we see some specific countries that also had large changes in rice yield. As a region as a whole, we average out all of these countries and we end up with this particular shade. But if we look at the specific countries themselves, we're going to end up with different information, different data. Now, of course, I want to know about why the change happened in the first place. All right, so if we think about our high yield seeds, this is going to lead to increased production of agricultural products. In this case, we're looking at rice, so we're going to be thinking about rice. And in terms of the benefits, it might have to do with climate, right? So we're going to need the right climate conditions. We're still going to need arable soil. We're going to need a workforce that can access and use new technology. Not every workforce is going to have maybe the education level or the experience to use a new technology. So even if we get the high yield seeds, if we get the new fertilizers, pesticides, if the populace doesn't have the requisite knowledge to use those technologies, then the technologies really aren't of any use. Right? It's like throwing going back 50 years and giving someone an iPod. It's a little dated, sorry. Giving someone the newest iPhone, right? They're going to have any idea how to use the technology. They're not going to know the purpose of it. They're going to know how to navigate it because it's just too new. They don't have the requisite knowledge to use the technology in the first place. That's going to be one of these limitations, right? So when we look at these other areas, especially in less developed areas or developing areas like in Africa and Asia, parts of the Middle East, why we don't see as much change, part of that rationale is going to be simply because the requisite knowledge isn't there, or there may not be training, or there may not be access to the technology in the first place, right? The workforce needs to be able to access the new technology. Requires education and access to capital is what we would call it, right? So they need to have the funds in order to buy the supplies in the first place in order to make the money that they need to make. Now, all this together gives us this distinction between our global and international scales and our regional scale, the different conclusions that we can draw. The common trend, if we think about the greatest change in rice yields per acre on an international scale, that's going to be Latin America, as we mentioned. On the regional scale, however, just looking at Southeast Asia, we have a different conclusion, where we have very specific countries that are going to have the highest increase in rice yields, like Vietnam, Laos, and Indonesia. And that change in scale changes the answer, changes the conclusions that we draw, and the answers that we provide. That, in general, is key for this particular topic, for this particular stimulus, where we're really looking to compare the two different scales. And that's what's underlying this question. So when you're crafting your questions or when you're answering the questions, track A or track B, that's what you want to think about, right? How these scales are different and what that means for the conclusions we draw from these maps and how they're different. That does it for stimuli of the week, or stimulus of the week 1.4.1 rather. Here's hoping it was helpful to you. We'll look at stimulus of the week number 2 for this week in the next video. Here's hoping you're happy, healthy, and safe, and we'll see you next time.